us. That strange passage from the Gospel of Luke about John the Baptist and his preaching, the one about fleeing from wrath, taking axes to trees, growing children out of rocks, winnowing forks, and unquenchable fire, it's about us. But how it is about us, to get to that, we first have to travel back in time to the turn of the ages to ancient Judea and Galilee, provinces of the Roman Empire, and set the stage for Luke's stories about the Advent and the birth of Jesus. Before we do that, I want to cite my sources. This week I read The First Christmas, what the Gospels really teach about Jesus' birth, by Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan, two of the most acclaimed Jesus scholars of our time. The book was actually a gift from a church member who thought it might help in the preparation of sermons this December, so thank you, it has. Well, the stories tell us that Jesus was born just before the death of the malevolent King Herod the Great. Now, you may not know that upon the death of Herod, that there were uprisings in Judea and Galilee of various messiahs, all attempting to overthrow Roman rule and reinstate an independent Jewish nation. These were not the uprisings that would occur more than 60 years later to lead to the destruction of Jerusalem that I talked about a couple of weeks ago. One of these rebellions was led by a man named Judas. Now, not our biblical Judas, but the disciple of Jesus. Judas's rebellion was in the city of Cyprus, which was the ancient capital of Galilee, and a mere 4 miles from Nazareth. According to the historian Josephus, Judas raised a considerable body of followers, broke open the royal arsenals, and having armed his companions, attacked the other aspirants to power. By the way, I do think that it reveals something about the biblical Judas, the disciple of Jesus, to realize that he shared the name of a famous rebel, zealot, in the generation just ahead of him. Well, how did Rome respond to this outrage? Well, at the time, Rome did not have any legions actually stationed in Galilee or Judea, a mistake they were not going to repeat again. The closest legions were those of Varus in Syria. Now, those legions were defending the eastern border of the empire from the warrior horsemen of the Parthian Empire. They figure in the book of Revelation. So Rome had to decide whether to make themselves vulnerable to the eastern hordes in order to quell the Jewish uprising. And we know from history that Varus used 3 legions ultimately to quell the unrest in Judea and Galilee, which lets us know it's a pretty serious event to move that many troops from the border to deal with this rebellion. And all of this occurred when Jesus was an infant or a toddler. So what happened in Cyprus? They're only 4 miles away from Nazareth. Well, according to Josephus, the general Gaius captured and burnt the city of Cyprus and reduced its inhabitants to slavery. According to Borg and Crossan, for Nazareth in 4 BCE, either there was timely flight to hiding places well known to the local peasantry, or its males were murdered, its females raped, and its children enslaved. If they escaped, the little they had would have been gone when they returned. What do they conclude from this visit to ancient history? That the major event in Jesus' village's life was the day the Romans came. As he grew up, he could not have heard again and again and again about the day of the Romans, who had escaped and who had not, who had lived and who had died. The Romans were not some distant mythological beings. Well, and similar things happened throughout Judea and Galilee. And they give context to John the Baptist's imagery here in Luke. Flee from the day of wrath. Stones where there should be children. Trees felled by the axe and the unquenchable fire. The audiences who heard John preaching were not thinking about some long future day of the Lord, end of the world sort of scenario. They were remembering days that had actually lived and that they assumed would come again in their lifetime as a very real possibility. So it's in this context that John the Baptist calls them to repent, to open their eyes and see the way of God that was even now being prepared. God was in the process of challenging the control of the ancient Roman Empire. And if God's reign was about to burst open, like the dawn breaking from on high, as his father Zechariah had said, then Rome was not going to sit idly by and allow it to happen. What was coming was going to be a great day of judgment, when either the reign of God or the domination of Rome would triumph. And this is what John is preaching about. It's what he's calling his listeners to prepare for. The Jews believed in an eschaton, that history would be complete when Earth's final kingdom was established. You know the book of Daniel in chapter 7, you get some sense of this vision. It's the four dread beasts who represent the empires of the earth, and in the vision of one likened to the Son of Man that establishes a reign of justice and peace. Or there's the vision in Zephaniah in Nazareth. As on a day of festival I will remove disaster from you, I will deal with your oppressors at that time, and I will save the land and gather the outcasts. It is the hope expressed in our opening carol, "In darkest night his coming shall be, when all the world is despairing." We don't look forward to an end of time that is the destruction of the earth. What we look forward to is the transformation of the earth. When the mute shall break forth in song, the lame shall leap in wonder, the weak be raised above the strong, and weapons broken asunder. Or to use a biblical term, the transfiguration of the earth. What will come to an end are evil, injustice, and violence. Borg and Clausen call it the great divine cleanup of the world. Well, the empire claimed that you could only get peace through victory. In fact, the empire made that claim again this week in a speech in Oslo. But the Hebrew prophets and the early Christians believed in a different kind of peace, the kind that was beyond all human understanding. They believed in a peace through God's justice. And it's this vision of the reign of God which John is warning his listeners about. When that day comes, they don't want to be on the wrong side. They don't want to be supporters of empire, of injustice, of oppression. And so he encourages them to be generous with one another, not to exploit each other. And note that the questions are raised not just from the general crowd, they're raised specifically by tax collectors and soldiers, who of course would be identified as agents of the empire. That's what their job was to be. And they're confused as to now how are they supposed to live faithfully. Notice John doesn't tell them to quit their jobs, but he does tell them how to execute that job without extorting others. So this strange passage is really about John's listeners' very real, everyday problems. How to be faithful to God while living in the Roman Empire, knowing that the Roman vision of the future and God's vision of the future were destined to clash. So if that's what this was for them, how is it about us?